One of the biggest wishlist items for hardware samplers and grooveboxes is support for third-party plugins and instruments, and while WAV files have pretty much become the standard for moving individual samples back and forth between software and hardware instruments, and they work great for one-shots or loops, for melodic instruments we're out of luck. There's no standard for plugins or multi-samples that's been broadly adopted like WAV files have. So if you buy a melodic instrument sample pack for one instrument, like MPC, Yamaha, or Iridium, theoretically you're out of luck if you want to use it outside that company's ecosystem or on your computer because the formats aren't compatible. That is, unless you're familiar with auto-sampling and ConvertWithMoss, which is the topic of this video. And one more reason it's interesting is that it's available for one of the best four-letter F words, which is free. To be clear, ConvertWithMoss doesn't get multi-samples to run everywhere, and your plugins won't run as is everywhere if you use it, but with a few of the ideas I'll show you in this video, you can get pretty close. This video, by the way, isn't sponsored by anyone unless you count my Patreon members who have exclusive access to dozens of multi-sampled instruments, among other perks. Before I dive into the details, for those of you not familiar with multi-sampled instruments and why we need them, you can't use a single WAV file to faithfully recreate an entire melodic instrument. For example, I sampled C3 from a piano plugin here, and it sounds okay when I play it back, and maybe even sounds okay if I pitch it up a few semitones, but as you can hear, if I transpose the sample an octave or more, it may sound useful in a certain context, but it doesn't sound like the original piano. Just for reference, here's the piano plugin I sampled, and you can hear that it retains the integrity of the instrument. In this case, by the way, by using physical modeling. Same goes for velocities. A piano and many other instruments will sound different as you play them harder or softer. Now, instruments not based on a synth or physical modeling, like this one, is multi-sampled, meaning that makers of piano libraries like these will typically sample every key at multiple velocities, sometimes even with round robins for the same note and velocity to get an even more natural sound. So that's what multi-sampled instruments are. Compatibility problems between platforms arise because some of these formats are closed, and even if you do have access to the individual samples, like in my multi-sample packs, your sample player of choice needs to know which sample to play for each note and velocity, not to mention fancier tricks like round robins, looping points, filters, and effects. And even if the note values are in the file names, very rarely do instruments let you import these and attempt to automap them based on the names. Now, there are some open formats for mapping samples to keyboard ranges and velocities and so on, like SFZ and SoundFont, but in practice, most software and hardware companies have decided each to develop their own format, and very rarely do they let you import other formats or even attempt to automap files. And that's where the free tool ConvertWithMoss comes in. It's an open source project by Jürgen Mossgraber that can take multi-samples that you bought or created using multiple source formats and convert them into instruments that are playable to any one of these target destinations. So for example, there are plenty of free instruments in the SFZ, SoundFont, or decent sampler formats. So if you want to use them on your black box or MPC, or even import them to Ableton Sampler, or again, any one of these other destinations, it's pretty easy to do with ConvertWithMoss. So for example, let's say you downloaded one of my instrument sample packs, and I provide these currently in the Akai MPC format. Now I do this for three reasons. One, because that's where I create them. Two, because MPC has amazing sound design features to further sculpt these samples, which I'll show you in a bit. And three, because the MPC Beats player is free and runs as a plugin in your DAW. However, the MPC software is a bit complex to use. It requires a lot of CPU power, and of course, the format it uses isn't compatible with any other hardware sampler you might want to run this on. So like I mentioned, the MPC plugin is a bit complex. Let's say that I wanted to convert it to a more lightweight and easy to use environment, which is decent sampler. This also plays back on iPads, by the way. Anyway, the workflow is pretty simple. You select your source format and then the folder which you've downloaded the files to. So this, for example, is my Muse multi-sample pack. If this folder contains multiple instruments, then ConvertWithMoss will batch process all of them very nicely. You may find additional parameters here, but you can use the defaults and choose the target format, and each of these may have additional parameters as well. Then you need to select a destination folder and make sure that it's empty. Let's create one, hit open. You can analyze first to see if there are any errors, and then if everything looks okay, These I can live with. These are just files that happen to be in the folder. You can just go ahead and click convert. And I didn't fast forward this. This is how long it takes. And if I go into the destination folder, you can see it batch converted all of these files. All I need to do is just double click one of them, and I can now play the multi-sample. I can also flip to other presets in the folder, turn down the effects if I want, and change any of the sound design parameters that are available in the default template. One nifty feature that ConvertWithMoss added to the recent version is the ability to create your own user interface templates. So with a bit of tweaking, I made mine look like this. And if you wanted to, you customize the colors, you could customize the entire interface, including the look of faders, knobs, fonts, graphics, everything. So this customization is a cool feature of Decent Sampler, and the injection of your own user interface is something supported within ConvertWithMoss. Now, like I mentioned earlier, ConvertWithMoss isn't perfect. Based on the format you're converting from or to, there might be limitations on which parameters can make it through. You don't need to read the entire manual. What I would recommend is just to read the first chapter and then search for the formats that you're converting from or to and skip through those sections of the manual to see which parameters are supported and which aren't. Sometimes these are in the notes that are in the appendix, and as you can see, there have been quite a few updates, but when you skip through them, you'll get a good idea of what's possible and what's not. Okay, so that's great as far as formats ConvertWithMoss supports, but what about closed formats like many commercial contact instruments or non-sample-based plugins like synths or even hardware instruments? What if you want to play those on any one of your target destination samplers or DAWs? In this case, you can create your own multi-samples of these instruments or plugins and then use ConvertWithMoss to move them over to your platform of choice. Now, sampling each note of an instrument can get a bit tedious, so a better way is to use an auto sampler that will automate the process for you, as long as the instrument you want to sample supports MIDI, which most do. There's an excellent and comprehensive commercial auto sampling tool called Sample Robot, but it's quite expensive. Then if you own Logic, it's Mac only, but it has its own auto sampler. Like I mentioned earlier, a product I like to use is the MPC software or MPC hardware, and you can use the free MPC Beats for this as well. This software works both on a Mac and on a PC, and if you own an MPC, you can use the hardware as well. I'm going to show you this on MPC too, because as of the making of this video, Akai hasn't released a free Beats version of MPC 3. To auto-sample a plugin or an external hardware synth, load up the MPC software, start a new empty project. Now, if you're planning on sampling an external MIDI device, choose the MIDI track type. And if you want to sample a plugin installed on your computer, choose the plugin track type. In terms of setup, to sample an external instrument, make sure you're sending MIDI out to the right port where it's connected and the right channel. If you want to monitor incoming audio, go to an audio track, select the input that the device is connected to, and then turn monitoring to on. And to sample a plugin, like I mentioned earlier, choose a plugin track type. Then choose the plugin using this button. Let's say go for Augmented Yangtze by Arturia, and let's open it up and choose a nice preset. Let's go for this one. Now, of course, play it a bit and change it to whatever you like. Anyway, let's close this for now. You'll need to figure out the range of notes you want to sample. No point in sampling parts of it you don't plan to use, or parts that just don't sound good. So let's say I'll go from C1 to C4. Anyway, when you're ready to go, open up the auto sampler. If I was sampling an external instrument, I'd choose the inputs that it's connected to. Since I'm sampling a plugin, I'll choose resample. Let's choose the range. I liked from C1 till C4, which is fine. Note stride lets you choose how many semitones you want to sample. If you select one, it's going to sample every single semitone, which is great for fidelity, but takes up a lot of memory. Usually I go with 3 semitones. Let's go with 6 just for this example. As we saw earlier, transposing too much loses the fidelity of the original sound. Then you can try out different velocities. to see how the sound changes based on the velocity with which you play. Let's choose 2 velocity layers for the sake of this example. Then you need to choose the note length, meaning how long you want to hold the note before it gets released. Typically, I'll go for around 8 to 10 seconds. If it works for a mellotron, it should work for us. But this sound decays regardless of how long you press it. So I don't think there's any point in holding it beyond, say, 3.5 seconds. And then even if I release the note quickly, it takes about a couple of seconds to totally die down. So I'll choose a tail of 2 seconds. You will want to rename this. Let's just call this pluck. Looping isn't relevant for this type of sound, so I'll turn that off. Generally, by the way, I just prefer to record longer samples for as long as I think I'll need to use a sample as opposed to use looping. It sounds much more natural that way. And if we scroll down, we'll see an estimate of how long this process will take. You can see that had we added more layers, obviously this would take up more time in memory. Let's just go for this. Let's make this the current program so we can explore it afterwards and hit do it. And once we finish the process, you can see we've got our new instrument in a new key group track. So we're no longer listening to the plugin. And this is the auto sample. Now, don't go ahead and use ConvertWithMoss on this because there's at least one problem here. The first is that you'll notice as I play this, there's no release when I leave a key. If I hold it long enough, it'll die down okay, because that's the sample itself, but quick presses don't sound good. So to edit this, you'll need to go into the program editor. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of features here, but we really need to only focus on a couple. First, make sure you're editing all the key groups, not just a specific one, which is what happens by default. So select all, and then just ignore everything and go to the release of the amp envelope and increase that to taste. Now, there are, of course, plenty of things you can change here, and not all the parameters get converted with ConvertWithMoss, whether playback is polyphonic or not. This, for example, isn't supported currently, but I know Dave from Decent Sampler is working on adding that. Anyway, check the manual, like I showed you earlier, to see what's supported. For us, that's good enough. If you really want, you can take a look at the samples themselves. You might want to truncate them a bit. Now, at this point, you can either save the project and convert it, or continue auto-sampling additional presets to create a bank of presets for this instrument. For the purpose of this video, I'll just save this, save project as. I'll put it in a new folder and just hit save. Now let's go to ConvertWithMoss, choose the folder, choose the target, which is Decent Sampler in my case. You can choose to make it monophonic or not. If you have multiple presets, you can bundle them into a Decent Sampler library. And for other destinations, if they support libraries, then you can do that as well. Let's select a new destination folder that needs to be empty. Untitled is good enough for now. Analyze. Again, ignore these for now. You can delete them, hit convert, double click this, and we've got our pluck preset. This is a fantastic tool. Like I mentioned, it's also free. And as you can see, it's being updated quite frequently. So please do report any issues or bugs. And you do that right here on the KVR thread. And if you find this useful, please do head out to his channel and click the little thanks button here and donate to Jürgen because he's doing all this for free. So that's it for ConvertWithMoss. For more sampling and electronic music tips, ideas, and tricks, check out my ever-expanding book on Patreon, where you'll also find plenty of multi-sampled instruments. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.